Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Tuesday evening Bible study that meets in our home, Jeff and BJ Anderson's house. Wish you could be here with us, but we understand all of us are facing the same circumstances where we are not to gather in groups of 10 or more due to COVID-19. And so we're just going to make the best of it and probably do a number of different things. One thing we might do are some Zoom sessions where we all phone in together live and just maybe visit with one another a little bit, catch up, see how everyone is doing, maybe pray for one another. And then I'll probably, in terms of the Bible studies, I'll probably record them. If not every week, every so often or so, for us to be able to take advantage of that. As you know, we're working through this book called How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth by Fee and Stewart. We have found it to be heady in a few places, a little bit difficult to wade through, but what we're doing is we're taking 2 weeks per chapter. The first week, we take a particular text from the Bible that illustrates the principles of that chapter, and the second week, we kind of walk through some of the basic ideas of that chapter in Fee and Stewart. So this week, our particular study is on Old Testament prophets and Old Testament prophecy. So I'm going to minimize this talking head here a little bit, get him down here in the corner, and I'm going to kind of walk through a few things where you can actually see the text that we're working through and just talk through some things as we pick through this passage in Isaiah 31. Old Testament prophetic literature is a challenge because it's so contextual. It was written to a very specific audience at a very specific time in history. And sometimes I like to say that the Bible is written for us, but not to us. And that is particularly true with prophetic literature, as there was a unique situation going on in ancient Israel that we are not privy to. In this particular text, though, it's pretty clear what's going on is there is this looming crisis on the horizon. And the crisis isn't a health crisis or a virus. The crisis is a military power from the Assyrians that are headed in their direction. And it's not if they're coming, it's when they are coming. And I found a number of parallels to our situation that we're all facing related to the coronavirus. So I'd like to begin by saying that everybody lives by faith. And I thought this picture was particularly funny and telling, funny in a kind of an interesting sort of way, and telling. This is the lineup at the gun store last week in Culver City, California. Now, if you know anything about Culver City, California, that is the center of NPR country, National Public Radio. And the audience of National Public Radio, in case you don't know, they're not all that big on buying guns. But here you are here in Culver City, California, with this long string of people wanting to buy guns. So everybody lives by faith. And during this time that we're dealing with in our own crisis, the own situation we're going through, there are some people that have faith in market forces and the market in general. And we've seen what's happened to the market the last couple of weeks. Some people have faith in government, either at their municipal or state or federal level, and they believe that their government will help them work to get through this crisis. Some have faith in our medical knowledge and the capability of our medical personnel and staff, and for good reasons we have faith in that. Some have faith in trusted leaders, whether it's at your local municipal level, state level, federal level. And some have faith just in nature's regularities and science and what it is that science can provide for us during this time. So everybody, not just religious folks, everybody lives by faith. And so this text deals very directly with that. One of my favorite quotes is this: Americans will always do the right thing only after exhausting all the other alternatives. And so, I think that is true. Why is it that the right thing is often the last thing we think about? And so I think Churchill here really nailed it about the Americans. We were pretty late coming into the war, and he knew he would do the right thing just eventually. And so what this text does is it talks about trusting in everything else and everybody else except God. So let's look at this text here. He says, "Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help, who rely on horses, who trust in the multitude of their chariots and in the great strength of their horsemen, but do not look to the Holy One of Israel or seek help from the Lord. Yet he too is wise and can bring disaster and does not take back his words. He will rise up against that wicked nation, against those who help evildoers. But the Egyptians are mere mortals. They're not God. Their horses are flesh. They're not spirit. When the Lord stretches out his hand, those who help will stumble, and those who are helped will fall. All will perish together." Nice, sunny language from the Old Testament prophet. Very typical of Old Testament prophecy. This is what's called a woe oracle. And if you're interested in more information about this, just Google woe oracle and Gerstenberger. That's a mouthful, but if you really want some information on these ancient, when you think of prophetic language, one of the things our textbook says here that we're using is that we need to think in terms of oracles, the genre in which the prophet is delivering a message. And a woe oracle is basically an ancient curse. And he's saying, those of you, woe to those of you who rely on Egypt for help. You're trusting in the speed and the strength and the stamina of horses. You're trusting in the strength and the numbers of your chariots. You're trusting in all these external things, but you're not looking to God. And so the prophet here says, these Egyptians, they're just people. They're mere mortals. Why are you placing all your effort and your faith and trust in them? Why not take a look at God? So again, the question is, why is God the last thing people often turn to rather than the first thing? Isaiah addresses this. Then he uses some metaphors here and some picturesque language. He says, this is what the Lord says to me, and I'm going to put this in language for Alaskans. As a bear growls over its moose kill, as though a whole band of protectors or shepherds is called against it, it's not frightened by their shouts. It's not disturbed by their clamor. You see the picture there? If you've got, in this case, a lion that is guarding its kill, you think you're going to spook him off? You have a bear that's killed a moose, you think you're going to walk up and shout and scare the bear away? No, that's not what's going to happen. So the Lord Almighty will come down and do battle on Mount Zion and on its heights, like birds hovering overhead. This time of year in Alaska, you know where the dead moose are because of the eagles and the ravens and the magpies that are circling around and landing around that. Like birds hovering overhead, the Lord Almighty will shield Jerusalem. He will shield it and deliver it, and he will pass over it and rescue it. So this message is actually, it may not sound like it, but it's actually a positive message in that he's saying, look, this nation that you are scared to death of that's on its way, don't worry about it. Jerusalem, God is going to defend Jerusalem. Trust in him. Don't trust in Egypt. Don't trust in all these other external sources. Don't trust in everything else. Trust in God first. Now we're going to talk about when we get to the application of this. This doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bath, but it does mean for Christian believers there's a priority in terms of where our ultimate security lies. Who's ultimately responsible for you? Is it your government? Is it God? Is it your money? Is it you? Where does your ultimate sense of safety and security come from? So he basically says, return, O Israelites, to the one you've greatly revolted against, for in that day every one of you will reject the idols of silver and gold your sinful hands have made. Assyria will fall by no human sword. Now think about that. Assyria will fall by no human sword. In other words, it's not going to be an army that takes them out. Something else is going to take them out. They'll flee before the sword. Their young men will be put to forced labor. Their strongholds will fall because of terror. At the sight of the battle standard, their commanders will panic, declares the Lord, whose fire is in Jerusalem, whose is in Zion, whose furnace is in Jerusalem. So Isaiah is saying, trust in God, and this invading army that is headed your way is not going to be a threat, and it's not going to be something you do about it, and it's not going to be something that the forces of Egypt do to help you. God himself is going to deliver you. So let's see what happens here. Here's the real story of what happens from three different perspectives. As you know, in history is biased. Whoever's writing the history has a particular sense of what it is they're trying to do and what it is they're trying to say. They have some presuppositions that are often unstated. They have an ideology that is often unstated. So there's three options here. There's an Assyrian version. I'm just going to put all three of these up here. A biblical version, and then Herodotus's version. So let's just back up and look at this Assyrian version. So did you know that the Assyrians wrote about this battle? And on the left there is a picture of Sennacherib's prism. See how it's shaped kind of like a prism? It's an ancient stone stela that is written in cuneiform characters in the Akkadian language, and it tells the story of Sennacherib's siege of Jerusalem. And of course, it tells it from their perspective. And basically what Sennacherib says on this prism, he says, I shut up Hezekiah, the king of Israel, the king of Judah, like a bird in a cage. See the language of boasting there? Now, he doesn't say he conquered Jerusalem, because he didn't. But he says, I shut up Hezekiah like a bird in a cage. And we know historically that the Assyrian army reached Jerusalem and laid siege to it, surrounded it. Now, the Assyrians never lost a battle in terms of their own recording of their own history. Of course they did. But in their own historical records, they never lost a battle. In fact, one summer when I was doing some volunteer excavation at Megiddo in Israel, we spent every evening reading Assyrian texts. And I can tell you, the Assyrians never lost a battle. And what's funny is they would exaggerate every victory and they would minimize every defeat. And you could tell that they were the places in their history when they were getting defeated because their battles were coming closer and closer and closer to home. But they were winning every battle if you just read the text itself. But the fact that they were coming closer and closer and closer to home means they were retreating and that they were going backwards. But yet the Assyrian version is always one of we're the victor. So that's their perspective. The Assyrians said, hey, I shut Hezekiah up like he was a bird in a cage. Whoops. Okay, biblical version. On the right-hand side is a picture of Hezekiah's tunnel. The Bible story says that one night, 185,000 Assyrians died outside of Jerusalem, probably due to a plague of some kind. And then the next morning, when the Judeans woke up, their army had left all these dead bodies behind, but God delivered mightily from this threat of the Assyrian invasion. So that's the biblical story. The Greek historian Herodotus also talks about this same Assyrian siege. And he says that the Assyrians went as far as Egypt, and when they got to Egypt, mice infested their camp, thousands and thousands of mice, and ate every leather thing they had in the camp, which meant their bowstrings, which meant the hand guards on their weapons, that these mice came and infested everything. And it was so bad that the entire army had to turn around and flee and leave. So some have suggested that the last two versions here, the biblical versions and Herodotus's version, that's where the truth lies. In that the army went as far as Egypt, they were infested by this plague of mice, the fleas and the bugs on the mice gave an illness to the soldiers. A bunch of soldiers died, and the army had to retreat and go back home. So that's the end of the story here that Isaiah is talking about. So what he says is, woe to those who go down to Egypt, who rely on horses, who trust in the multitude of their chariots, in the great strength of their horsemen, but do not look to the Holy One of Israel or seek help to the Lord. So Isaiah, before this army ever gets there, he is telling the people to trust in God, and that God is going to deliver in ways that will surprise them, not through human ingenuity and through human efforts. So how do we apply this today? Here's a picture just this week of the mobile place there by Providence Hospital, where you can go and get your COVID-19 test. You have, of course, you have to have a doctor's recommendation or a recommendation from an emergency clinic in order to do that. But let me just say that Christians are not exempt from the same kinds of suffering that other people go through. So in no way am I trying to say in this text that, oh yeah, just trust in God and he's going to make all these problems just magically go away. In some cases, that's what happens. Christians die. Christians get sick. A person's faith does not prevent that from happening. But it's that trust in God, no matter what the situation is, that is most importantly, and that is most important. And the lesson here is that that trust in God is not the last of all our options, but the first, because that's where our ultimate security lies. Doesn't mean we can't trust in the faith of our government to make the decisions that need to be made in order to prevent this virus from spreading. Doesn't mean we can't trust in trusted leaders. Doesn't mean we shouldn't place some trust in our medical knowledge and in just nature's regularities. But we've all been around long enough to know that those aren't the kinds of things that help us get through these most difficult times. Everyone says it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. And so for the Christian, we have the opportunity to really be something during this crisis, to be something for someone else, to live a life that isn't paralyzed by fear, but a life that trusts in God. So I thought this text was very telling for us. One last verse that I really like, Psalm 118. It says, it's better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in humans. It's better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in princes. So hope you guys all have a good week. Hope this passage from Isaiah kind of gives you a taste of prophetic rhetoric, prophetic sarcasm, exaggeration, a lot of the things that the prophets use to get their message across. Have a good week, everybody.